Hi everybody, welcome to class 2 of our virtual knit along here. This is class 2 of our Vine and Branches hat, so welcome. We posted the first one a couple nights ago, so if you haven't seen that yet, go back and have a look. So welcome. We left you with the homework of getting your ribbing done on your hat, your 12 rounds of knit 1 purl 1 rib, and your 1 round of increasing. So you're now should be at 160 stitches and ready to start on the actual color work. So here we're going to have a look at the chart. You can only see part of it here, sorry, I'll do this. The chart itself is 4 stitches across, so we are going to repeat these 4 stitches all the way around each time we do a round. And charts are, in general, if they're written for circular knitting, they are written to be read right to left, because of course you're always going right to left as you go across your round, and they're written to be read from bottom to top. So we're starting at the bottom and working our way up. So we're going to be doing 44 rounds of chart 1. And we're going to do that. That's just about going to take us to the top of our hat, where we'll do our decreasing chart. And as you can see here, each square is a stitch, and each stitch is a different color. So your color A, your main color, is denoted as light blue. Color B is dark green. Color C is yellow. Color D is burgundy, and color E is light green. So you it's totally up to you, of course, as to which color you make which, where you want it in your hat. And as I said before, I think I said in the last video, I really don't think you can go too far wrong with color work. I've never really seen too many color combinations that didn't work. It really, you can move one color around and you get a completely different look to your hat, and that's okay. There again, because this is your first hat, go easier on yourself and don't worry about what to put where too much. It will look good, trust me. One thing that I wanted to talk about, like I said before in the last video, a lot of people when they do color work, it tends to be their gauge of their color work, their actual knitting tends to be very, very tight. Because of course, when you're doing color work, you are carrying the color that's not in use on a particular, if you're doing 3 stitches of one color and one of another, you're carrying your stitches. We call those little carries, we call them floats. So people tend, especially when they're learning color, they tend to make their floats quite tight. They tend to sort of agonize over drawing their color to the back, and they draw it around too tightly. But I'm going to show you some ways to avoid that. When you make something out of color work, you want to be able to, the way that you've got good tension with it is if you can take your knitting and flex it so it's got some stretch. You don't want to be wearing a hat that is completely like solid cement. You want to be able to, the person to be able to put it on their head and it to have some give. So a good way to know that you're carrying your floats loosely and nice, I should say, is to say, okay, can I stretch and flex my knitting? And if you can do that, then chances are your tension is going to be pretty bang on, okay? One thing to remember, and I always tell people this, is you are going to be carrying your floats loosely, and your brain is going to tell you that it's too loose. But you almost can't carry your floats too loosely. Trust me on this one. Go loose, and then even as you're going, I'm going to be able to show you how you can be stretching as you go. Go loose, and then if your brain says you're not sure, go a little looser. You almost can't overdo it. Okay, so looking at the back of my work, my floats, even though if you make your floats nice and loose, they're not hanging down, they're not getting in the way of anything, but they're giving enough flex that my hat has some nice give to it, okay? And like I say, after you get one hat done, you'll have a good sense of whether you are a tight color knitter or a looser color knitter. Sometimes people, what they'll do is they'll actually go up to a bigger needle. When they get into doing color work, they might realize that, okay, if the pattern calls for a 3 1/4, they realize that for them they have to go up to a 3 1/2 when they're doing color, because they tend to be on the tighter side. Okay, so what we're going to do, if you notice on your chart, the first round of our chart is solid color 3, so C rather. So we're doing a full round with just color C, but don't break off color A from when you did your ribbing. Leave your main color, your color A, leave it just dangling. Join in your new ball of color C, just like you would join any new ball. Join it in, start knitting with it, and leave a 6-inch tail that we can weave or tie in later. And yeah, so what I've done is, just so you didn't have to sit and watch me knit a full round boringly of color C, I've picked color C as my aqua, and so I joined it in and I knitted a full round in my color C. Okay, so we've got our ribbing, we've got our 1 round of gray increase, and then we've got a full round of color C just knit. Okay, now likewise we are going to be using our color C again on round 4, so I'm not going to bother cutting it either. I'm going to leave it live. You can always look at a color work chart and say, okay, if I'm going to be using that color again in maybe 4 rounds or less, leave it, and we're just going to carry it up with us when we need it. Okay, so I've done my round of C. Now if you look at round 2 of your chart, starting at the right, it starts with a light green square, which is color E, and then a color A square. So 1 stitch of E, 1 stitch of A, 1 stitch of E, 1 stitch of A, and we're going to do that all the way around. You can see here on this sample hat, it was 1 green, 1 oatmeal, 1 green, 1 oatmeal. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do that. My color my color E, I've decided is going to be my teal. Okay, so literally what you are going to do is you are just as if you're joining in a new ball of yarn again, you are just going to start knitting with your color E. So I just drape it around my needle, knit a stitch with color E. Okay, and just so that first stitch wasn't loose, I just pulled my color C, that last stitch of color C a little bit taut, just to, or the join rather, just to tighten it up. So I did 1 stitch of color E. Now I'm going to do 1 stitch of my main color, color A, and that is down where I left it, down below. So literally not pulling tightly, just knit 1 stitch of A, okay, and 1 stitch of E. There again, not pulling at all tightly, just very loosely knitting a stitch with E. Now, to keep your yarns from tangling, the way to do it, especially the reason I wrote this pattern this way, in that you're never using more than 2 colors in a round at once. So I'm going to always keep my color A under when I, bringing it under the teal, and when I use my teal, it's going to come over my color A, just so that I don't end up with a tangled mess. This one I'm knitting with it, color A, it's under, and color E is over. So I've got, if you can see here, over, under, and it just makes your floats tidy. It doesn't change the knitting, so to speak, but it does keep things. If you were to take your gray over your teal all the way through, you know, and doing over, under, over, I should say under, over, under, you'd end up with a tangled mess and having to untangle them all the time. So this way, if you keep gray under, teal over, you end up with a nice, tidy, easy way to knit. One thing that I'm not going to bother talking about particularly today, because I don't think we need to, is something called color dominance. So sometimes, you know, in this is color theory, I guess, that of course you've got certain colors that recede and certain colors that come forward in your work. And that, believe it or not, that actually can be determined in your color knitting by which yarn you take under and which one you take over. I don't think we need to worry about that this class. We'll talk about that another day. You know, just go with your gut and put which one you want where, and keep it that way. So like, for example, whenever I get to another point on my chart where I'm using my light gray, I'll keep it under, just so that I can easily remember, oh yeah, my gray is always at the bottom. My secondary color I'm going to keep up here. Okay, so still just knitting a gray loosely, knitting a teal loosely, and do a few, and then have a look at your work, give it a stretch. Is it stretchy? If it is, you are you are carrying loosely enough. If it's like cement and you can't move your stitches and you can't stretch your work, you're probably carrying too tightly. So just go back a few stitches, undo your work, and try again. So like I say, I am barely pulling on. I'm just literally pulling enough on these colors to just to pull them through the stitch. I am not tightening them as I go. I'm not finishing a stitch and tightening it at all. I am literally just letting the stitch naturally sit where it wants to be, and there's no pulling happening at all. My tension is technically very loose, okay? As you can see, there's nice flex on the needle, okay? So this whole round of round 2 is literally one stitch of color E, one stitch of color A, one stitch of E, one stitch of A. Okay, so finish round 2 that way. Round 3 is the same but different. Instead, it is one stitch of color A, one stitch of color E. So you're going to be getting that little checkerboard effect, okay? So you're going to end up with a nice little border. After you've done rounds 2 and 3, you will be ready again to do a full round in color C. So what happens is, pretend I'm back all the way around here. I'm back at my join and I've done my rounds 2 and 3. So literally what I would do is I would get to that point, I would put my color A and my color E down. I'm not getting rid of them yet. I'm not breaking anything, so to speak, yet. I'll talk about that in a minute. But you would get done there with rounds 2 and 3, and then because your color C is still sitting here, all you need to do is literally start working with it, and we will be, of course, pulling it up 2 rounds to start using it, but that little carry of 2 rounds of height, it's not going to matter. You're just literally going to pick it up and start knitting with it, just like it was what you just had, right? There's no harm in that. So you will just do your 2 rounds of 2 and 3, 1 full round of color C, okay? And that's what I'm going to get you to do this first, what are we now? It's Friday night. Let's come back on Monday night, okay? So Monday evening, same time, 7:30 p.m. Pacific, and we will move on and do a little bit more of the chart together before I send you farther. So your homework is to finish rounds 1 through 4. And after you come back, we will talk in the next class. We'll talk about what we're going to start doing with our ends. But in the meantime, you don't need to break anything. You don't need to tie anything off. I haven't even tied in my, the ends that I started with. I've just left, 5 or 6 inch tails and started knitting. I can weave in, tie in, deal with those ends later. And we will talk about that on Monday evening. So like I say, rounds 1 through 4 are your homework. If you have any questions, pop into the shop or email us. But yeah, hopefully that gives you a good explanation of how to start. And if in doubt, like I say, if you're not sure, again, chart reading, if you've never read a color chart, you're always reading it right to left. So you do 4 stitches and then you come back to the beginning. 4 stitches, back to the beginning. So on rounds 2 and 3, it's green, aqua, green, aqua, green, aqua, green, aqua, all the way around. Okay, those 4 stitches, this is your repeat. And then likewise, round 3 is aqua, green, aqua, green, aqua, green, aqua, green. And that is giving us our little checkerboardy effect in here. Okay, so we will be back on Monday night. Have fun, and we will see you in a few days.